This week, we discuss findings from the annual Consumer Reports Reliability Survey, share our first impressions of the Land Rover Defender SUV, and whether underbody shields can make for a quieter ride and prevent rust. Next on Talking Cars. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode. I'm Mike Monticello.
I'm John Lincove.
And I'm Jennifer Stockberger.
Well, it's great to be with you folks out there, whether you're watching, whether you're listening. Thanks for tuning in and coming along for the ride. We have some pretty big news this week. It's actually Consumer Reports news, and that is that our annual reliability data is coming out this week, which is always a big deal for us here at Consumer Reports, but also hopefully a really big deal for you folks out there, because knowing which cars, 2021 model year cars are predicted to have good reliability and which ones aren't, can really go a long ways toward helping you make a well-informed buying decision, which of course is something that we want to help you folks out with. But before we get into any kind of results from this reliability data, Jen, can you just tell us a little bit about how the survey data is obtained?
Right. So this is actually data from CR members that are reported back to us through our surveys on the problems they're having with their own vehicles over the past year. So you say 2021, but it's also all the used vehicles out there and how they're changing over time. Each of the family's members can report on up to 2 vehicles, and it's typically hundreds of thousands of vehicles of data that we get back. So it's really comprehensive, lots of data, even on models that you might not think you would get a sufficient sample size on. We do. And so it gives the history of used vehicles, predictions, as you mentioned, on new 2021 models are based on a vehicle's previous 3 years of reliability. If they had been redesigned more recently, 2020 or 2019, we may use 2 years of data to make those predictions. And brand new models are based on the brand reliability, the previous generation of the vehicle, if it's a redesign, and whether that vehicle shares components, platforms, etc., with a kind of cousin sister vehicle. And then we'll make predictions on the new models as well. Again, those will be verified obviously in the next year when they've been out a little longer, but it's pretty good data on both new and used vehicles. So as you said, it's a great resource. The reliability data goes into a vehicle's overall score, including our road tests, the reliability and owner satisfaction, and some bonus points for additional safety. So it's a pretty key element of our ratings for sure.
Right. Sounds like a big deal. Also sounds like we have some maybe some pounding going on at your house, John. Is that what I'm hearing in the background?
Yes. Part of the joys of working at home are that when storms come through and rip flashing off the side of your house and your roof, you just happen to have the contractor show up unannounced the day of Talking Cars.
We'll work around that. So obviously a lot goes into it, and there's a lot of work behind the scenes to make all of these predictions and come up with all of this good information. John, let's talk about something, maybe interesting that we learned this year. So far, we've pretty much been thinking that electric vehicles, EVs, are pretty darn reliable, but we learned some new things this year, didn't we? Yeah,
one of the things that's kind of a talking point that a lot of people out in the conventional media and the automotive media have talked about is that, EVs don't have a gasoline engine or a diesel engine, and they only have a 1-speed direct drive transmission. They don't have a gearbox the same way. They're going to be simpler. They're going to be more reliable. They're going to be better. And in some ways, it's true. They have fewer parts compared with a conventional gasoline or diesel powered vehicle, definitely. But they also still have parts. They still have pieces that have to be manufactured. And what we've seen is that as the builds have ramped up, as the volumes have ramped up, as more manufacturers getting into it and producing EVs, And you do see some problems. And whether it's a supplier issue or whether it's a build process issue, we have seen some EVs this year, really stand out with more problems, so much to the point that we're not able to recommend models because of that, and it's a motor issue, or it could be an electronic issue, just like a regular conventional car. And when I say motor, it's the electric motor. We know there's not a gasoline engine in it, but, there's still electric motors and they still have, are assembled. And, we've seen issues like that. So an EV may have a better cost of ownership overall or save you money in the long term because it's going to be less expensive to operate, depending on where you are in the country or in the world. But it doesn't mean that they're going to be infallible, and it doesn't mean that they aren't going to have potential breaking down at some point.
Right. That's something that maybe offsets, like, we don't want to say don't buy an EV. We certainly are not going there at this point. We're maybe because there's so many more out there now, we are starting to see, like you said, John, the sample size is bigger, but there's still some real benefits to that EV ownership as far as we can tell so far. But one thing that I just want to touch on real quick that we kind of learn each year is that when you look at it from a brand perspective, right? Like, because all brands, not usually they're going to have some reliable models. Maybe they're going to have a couple that aren't that reliable. But if you look at what brands stand out as being reliable, it's usually the ones that their models share a lot of common components, right? Share common engines, drivetrains. And when they have redesigns, maybe they're not completely full redesigns, right? So that's what we're kind of seeing, right, John? That, like, if the manufacturer shares a lot of components across the whole model line, that's quite often the ones that end up being the most reliable brands overall.
Yeah, if you look, and that's correct, Mike. I mean, if you look historically, the brands that have dominated our brand rankings, in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, Toyota and Lexus, they don't reinvent the wheel continually. They share a small number of powertrains across both brands, the Toyota and the Toyota's Lexus brand, the luxury brand. And it's really when you have an outlier vehicle, and the Lexus LS is an example from last year. A new vehicle, all kinds of different componentry. It's not really shared as much among all the other Toyota brands. That one was problematic last year. But so many other ones using the 3.5 liter V6 or their 2 liter turbocharged engine. People mock them like, why don't you have 8, 9, 10 speed automatic transmissions? And many of their models still had 6 speeds. Well, it's a robust transmission, and they were able to get what they want fuel economy wise out of it. Yes, they do have more multi-speed transmissions and the 7, 8, 9s, but if it's not broke, don't fix it type of thing. Toyota's achieving its reliability, it's achieving its fuel economy, it's achieving its performance numbers. So that's why it's they're continuing at the top.
I like that you used proper English instead of saying the usual, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, John. All right.
Right.
We're going to move on again, folks. Be sure to go to cr.org/reliability.
Yeah, there's just so much there, Mike. Who makes the best brands, what new models are reliable or not, what models have gained or lost in reliability, and what that means for their recommendations. Did they all of a sudden become recommended or lose recommendation based on those scores? Used vehicles are super popular now. You can see by model year going back. It's just a boatload of information for people that are shopping.
Yeah, so make sure you check it out.
We wanted to take a quick second to tell you about a new initiative we're introducing on the podcast, which is our Talking Cars donation program. For those of you that don't know, Consumer Reports is a nonprofit organization, and we're able to do all of the work we do, including anonymously buying our test cars and producing this show, through memberships to our website and magazine, as well as through donations. What the Talking Cars donation program will do is allow loyal Talking Cars fans to support the show, assist in supporting the cost of producing the podcast, as well as support all of the work CR does to keep consumers safe. You'll be able to contribute either as a one-time donation or on a monthly basis. Even $5 a month really helps. Go to cr.org/givetalkingcars and find out more.
We're going to move on to the next segment, which is This Week at the Track. And this week, we're going to talk about the all-new Land Rover Defender. Now, this is an interesting model because the Defender hasn't been sold in the U.S. since the 1990s. It was known back then as, a simple yet rugged, robust, really off-road vehicle. Land Rover's now brought it back to this market, and it's completely redesigned. It's available in 2 or 4 doors. You can get it with a turbocharged 4-cylinder or a turbocharged 6-cylinder. 4-wheel drive comes standard, and both engines come mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission. We purchased the 2020 Land Rover Defender 110 SE for our test program with the turbocharged 6-cylinder. Optional equipment on our test vehicle includes the driver assist pack with adaptive cruise control, the cold climate pack, which brings heated windshield, heated washer jets, headlight washers, and a heated steering wheel. We also got a panoramic sunroof and 14-way adjustable front seats with heaters, among other options. With the $1,350 destination charge, our test vehicle came out to $70,710. John, I'm going to start with you. Before we get into the nitty gritty of what's going on inside the vehicle, what's it like to drive this thing?
It's surprisingly enjoyable. From my feeling is that some of the Land Rovers, particularly the big boy Range Rover, a little top heavy feeling. They're great view. I mean, it's great, for off-roading. You have a commanding view to see where see what's around you. But this one feels a little more, a little happier on the highway. And I will say, Range Rover Sport, on the other hand, it feels very tied down, and is a good balance between the height, but feeling low enough that it's, it doesn't feel tippy. Relatively quiet, to drive. It was fine around town, but fine on the highway. Easy to park, easy to navigate around. Overall, an enjoyable vehicle. Just no matter the situation.
Jen, what about you?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was thinking about this as I was writing notes today. And one of the things about driving so many cars that I think happens to us is we are able to desensitize a little bit from brand and maybe reputation. Like we're able to detach and say, okay, it's a Land Rover, just judging it truly on how it is as a vehicle. And in this case, I have to agree with John. And I wrote down pleasantly surprised. This is a tall, narrow, vehicle. I expected it to have a little more roll. I was pleasantly surprised. It was pretty tied down. Good road manners. I do think it feels special. It certainly looks great. I absolutely got reaction when I was driving it from people. You get the occasional thumbs up on the highway. Got that. Inside, it's super roomy. I imagine when we do our child seat ratings, it's going to be fantastic because it's this big, wide, flat, low belt line. I think a family would be super happy in this car. That John talked about, or Mike, you mentioned the sunroof, just very open feeling. Visibility wise, they do have the typical big spare tire on the back. Really detracts from visibility rearward. I almost said, I wonder if I owned this, if I take that spare and put it in the cargo area just to get some better visibility. A little bit of hesitation from a standing stop. You get nothing and then you get everything and launch forward. And the auto start is a little rough, I thought. And basic fit and finish. My son was in it and he said, Mom, look there's open screw holes. And he called it basic. And I said, Griffin, it's a Land Rover. It's austere. That was my word I used.
Yeah, so, that clearly, that was those obvious screws they're going for a look there. Yeah, it's intentional. Going for a look.
And we
John,
do say with controls, they've got some controls that do multifunctions, meaning you tap it and it does one thing, you tap it again and it does another thing. It makes you have to look down to see where you're at, and just not a fan of that.
Yeah, I think if you look through our logbook, most people were commenting that the controls are one of the really sore spots of this vehicle, and they're just not intuitive to use. Like you said, the same control might do a couple different things. The infotainment system is a little bit laggy at times. It's not as instantaneous as some. John, I know infotainment was one of your issues with it, but there was also was it the spare tire or the way the hatch opens that you had did you have some bike rack issues or something like that?
Yeah, the thing is the rear door with that side open, has a handle. It's assisted. It pulls open. It's great in some ways because it opens up this giant square. But on the other hand, it makes it very difficult to load from a curb. It makes it very difficult if you're parked in close to somebody, someone pulls up behind you. Also made it really challenging with the bike rack. I had my two bike rack on there, and the spare tire cut into one space. So I only had a one bike rack. Okay, yes, I could throw it in the back of the car, but if I'm carrying people and such. So then I put my 4 bike rack on there, which has a drop, so you can lower it so that when you raise a door like this, you could use the hatch and keep the bikes mounted. But you can't do that because the door swings open. Also, the tire ate into one of the spaces, so it was a 4 bike rack that held three bikes. Yes, you can put it on the roof. You can get that. You can work around it. You could get an extension. You can do things, but it's a compromise.
Yeah, I agree. For me, I loved the driving position. It has this really elevated, commanding view, which is it's kind of a Land Rover thing for off-roading, but it actually works great for on-road people too. The drivetrain, like I think you guys were mostly saying, it has plenty of power. I had a couple 2-lane, passing zones where I made use of that and had plenty of power. The transmission works well. The engine has a nice kind of grumbly sound to it that I enjoy. I did have a couple issues though. I thought, there was some excessive wind noise on our model anyway, coming from the passenger side windshield. And there was a few squeaks and rattles that don't bode well for future, for down the road for how well it's going to hold up. But, we can't say anything about that because we don't know at this point what's going to happen. It could just be our model. But it kind of gives you a little bit of pause. I didn't think the front seats were anything special. I thought they were okay. But it has nice seat back bolstering on the seat back, but the seat bottom really doesn't hold you in place very well. Rear seat
long though. That cushion's long. If you like a long seat cushion, you will like this, I think.
Right. The rear seat has tons of headroom, good foot space underneath the front seats, which we don't always see. But again, it's a very flat seat, so I'm not sure how good it's going to be for, say, a long trip. There's nothing really, because it's so flat, it's not contoured at all, it's not really going to hold you in place, although I will say the leg support is pretty good.
Yep.
I wasn't a fan of the handling. Its limits are so low that when I was pushing it on a twisty road, the stability control system was cutting in. Now, that's not dangerous. It's trying to keep you from doing anything silly, but it does kind of feel like a little bit of a heavy lumbering beast at times. And like you both mentioned, the visibility to the rear. If you have the rear seat, the second row headrest up, it forms from the B pillar, the side pillar, all the way back, basically a blind spot. So that was some. But here's what I really thought is that there's just something cool about it. You know what I mean? Like, even though it's not perfect, from this kind of retro modern boxy styling, has these really cool taillights, those sunroof, the side kind of sunlight windows that it has. There's just really some neat things about it that and the color. We even got this really cool, Land Rover color. So, there's a lot to like here.
It's very much like a Toyota FJ Cruiser in that it has some flaws, but it also has some very distinct features, and that makes it unique, that makes it stand out. The interest in it, and it's very interesting coming at a time when you have Jeep Wrangler redesigned a few years ago, iconic off-road. They bring out the Gladiator. Now they're all of a sudden talking about the V8 version that was recently introduced. Ford with the Bronco. You had these historical nameplates coming back with these niche vehicles. Who's really going off-road that much. Yeah, I like the fact that it has conventional window controls finally, because I know you live with the Land Rover, you own the vehicle, you own a Mercedes, you own a whatever, you get used to the controls. But those ones that were up here were always awkward, and now they're just kind of at a normal place, not an awkward reach. I would drive it a lot, but I don't know if I would own it, particularly given JLR, Jaguar Land Rover's reliability history.
We'll have to see about that. All right, well, this is just our first impressions at this point. We're going to have a lot more on the Defender in the coming weeks on cr.org. It's in the middle of a full test, going through our whole regimen. So please stay tuned for that. Let's move on to the next segment, audience questions. Don't forget to send those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to talkingcars@icloud.com. And speaking of video clips, we have 2 this week, so we're very excited about that. So let's start it off with Jonathan.
Hi, Talking Cars. Something I've noticed is that some new vehicles have NVH shields on the underbody, whereas other vehicles do not have any shields on the underbody. Do those shields on the underbody have any impact in preventing rust in the long run by shielding the metal from salt, rocks, or the debris that could chip the paint and facilitate corrosion? Thank you.
So, Jen, why don't all automakers put these underbody shields on their vehicles?
Right. So first of all, Jonathan mentions NVH, noise, vibration, and harshness. These are what these shields are for. And Jonathan's right. Different manufacturers have different tolerances for acceptability of what's noisy and what's not. And some go to great lengths to dampen and eliminate noise, and some don't. So you definitely will see them in different places. The other thing that shields are underneath the car for, and it may not be NVH, is heat. You'll see a lot of heat shields, particularly around the exhaust areas, just to protect everything underneath from the heat. So shields are kind of a mixed balance. So yes, to Jonathan's question specifically, certainly anything that's a barrier between, actual functioning components and road, salt, dirt, rocks, whatever it might be, is a good thing. On the counter side, however, shields can be a trap. Depending on how they're oriented, salt, sand, rocks, etc., can actually get in there and kind of be held there. You can't really get in, even with a good underbody wash, and get those cleaned out. Well, sometimes they mask a leak that may be happening under there. So they're kind of a mixed blessing. It's kind of a counter.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Let's move on to our next video question. This comes from Patrick. Let's see what Patrick is asking us today.
Hi, Consumer Reports. I'm looking to buy a used vehicle to replace my 2003 Toyota Highlander Limited Edition. Factors that are important for me for my next vehicle are reliability. I tend to do my own repairs. All-wheel drive for snow, ice, and freezing temperature conditions. Comfort, versatility and practicality for cargo, and fuel economy. Normally, I would only limit my search to a Toyota or Honda product, but I'm wondering if there's other vehicles, classes, models that perhaps I should consider.
Well, Patrick, we're glad you're staying safe out there. Let's start with you, John. What do you have a suggestion for Patrick?
I had a hard time with this because he threw in some things.
He wants everything.
Well, he wants everything, but like lawnmower and such, it was one of those things. If you say like, okay, I'm camping, I might throw a bicycle in there, people, it's one thing. You start throwing in, lawn equipment and everything else. I don't know exactly how far he wants to go with keeping it clean versus keeping it making it just functional. Easy choice is a Honda Ridgeline, in that it has a trunk where you could put some stuff. It has a big bed in the back where you can put the lawn equipment. You could get accessories to hold down a bicycle. I believe you could even get an accessory that has like a tent that hangs off the back of it. You can make it into like a little cabin or like a little tree house, so to speak, in a way. Coming from a non-camper such as myself, I don't endorse that. But it's also comfortable, to drive around in, because it's basically a 2-row Honda Pilot in some ways, or even a Honda Passport.
I think maybe the only one that the box it doesn't tick off is maybe the fuel economy for the Ridgeline. But it seems like, but I think that's a really good choice, especially like you said with the lawnmower thing. If Jen, wow us with your choice.
Okay, so I was on if it ain't broke, I'll say it non-grammatically correct. Yeah. Don't fix it.
That's what we expect from you.
Yes. So I said Toyota Highlander Hybrid. I was thinking that when Patrick was rattling off, it sounded like CR ratings, reliability, fuel economy. So Toyota Highlander Hybrid, if you look at the numbers, his Highlander, when we tested it brand new, 18 miles per gallon. Toyota Highlander Hybrid, 35 miles per gallon. When do you get a 17 mile per gallon benefit? Totally reliable. He's obviously used to the driving and likes his Highlander. I said, just stick with it. Go with the Highlander Hybrid.
Okay. Do you want the best pick?
John already said it, and I already said it.
Jen said it. I think Jen has it.
So I came up with Subaru Outback Limited XT. Now, again, I was trying to tick off all the boxes, but I'll say John already pointed out that one I didn't tick off was the, fitting a lawnmower in the back. So I kind of, again, it's hard to find that perfect vehicle. But the reason why I went with that is because this is a vehicle with a 260 horsepower, 2.4 liter turbo 4-cylinder. So it has plenty of power. Good fuel economy, better fuel economy than most mid-sized SUVs, 24 miles per gallon overall in our testing. Basically a tall wagon, a comfortable ride, comfortable front seats. So it's kind of like the alternate to an SUV.
Yeah,
So.
It's by EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It's rated as an SUV. So it's it looks like a wagon, but it's rated as an SUV, but it gets the fuel economy of a regular car. So
right. So if he was thinking about going outside the box, maybe try there. But I think between those three picks, hopefully we came up with something for you. All right, let's move on to our next question. This comes from Leo. Leo says, I am 14 months into a 48-month lease, and I think I would like to get out of it and do conventional financing where I would own the vehicle at the end of the term. Because of my credit score and the negative equity that accompanied the vehicle when I traded it in, my lease payment is bordering on uncomfortable. I also drive a lot, which will put me over the yearly mileage allotment. Should I wait until midway through to try and refinance, or should I just finish the lease and never do it again? John, I'm going to throw this one your way. Do you have any advice here?
Leo, not knowing all of the parameters, credit score and what your monthly payments are, et cetera, and how tight it is. The best thing I would say is really look at try to get out of the lease by going to a lease trader or a lease swap. You're going to pay a little bit up front. You may have to pay someone a couple $1,000s even, to offset the fact that they're taking on a lease that, maybe a little high. But it's going to get you out of it quicker. It's going to let you dump this. You're not going to have something that's bordering on uncomfortable for another 2 years or so. I would really go that route. I wouldn't try to refinance more. You're just going to be throwing money after bad money after bad money. You're going to have 3 cars that you're going to be financing. So if you can get out of it and not go back into leasing again, because there are the costs such as the mileage that you're going to be going over, as well as any maintenance that happens, once a 3-year warranty runs out, that's going to be even more onerous. So I would really do my best to get out of it rather than rolling it into any kind of other payment or buying it outright, because you're going to have to take a loan out on that as well.
Okay. All right. Well, Leo, good luck to you. And hopefully you can find a good solution. And regardless, probably learned a valuable lesson for the next time makes a purchase or a lease. So we're going to move on to the next question. This is Thomas from Edmonton. As my child grows, when will it be safe to use the car's 3-point seatbelt without a booster seat? Jen, you're one of our child seat experts, so I'm going to throw this to you, obviously. What do you think?
Right. So for Thomas, there's actually a very objective 5-point check. And boosters are all about putting the seatbelts in the right places, belt to bone, getting it in the right location. So the first question, can your child sit all the way back with their back flat against the seat back? Again, they're taking best advantage of the seatbelt, not having more room to move forward in a crash. At the same time, can their knees bend comfortably over the front of the cushion? What kids will do if they're not comfortable is get comfortable. And when they can't keep their back flat and their knees over the edge, they'll slouch to try and get there. And what that does is brings the lap belt up onto the abdomen rather than on the bony parts of their hip where you want it. So that becomes one of the third questions. Is the belt, when they're seated comfortably down on their hips, really you want it on the upper thigh, engaging that hip bone? Fourth question, is the shoulder belt centered between their shoulder and their neck across their collarbone? That's where you want it. If it's riding up their neck or off their arm, you know what the first thing they're going to do is put it behind them, and it's doing no good whatsoever. And then the fifth is a little bit more subjective, is are they old enough and behaviorally ready enough to stay that way for the entire trip? The one other thing I will add, for those listening to the United States, there is different state laws for booster seats in every state. So ours in the state of Connecticut right now is 8 and 60 pounds. You have to meet both criteria. I did look up, I think I'm right, in Edmonton, Alberta, there is no specific booster seat law. So Thomas, you're going to have to go with a test. If you can't answer yes to back, knees, shoulder, hip, and comfortable for the whole trip, then leave them in a booster.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's great advice. So hopefully everyone will take that into account with their kids. That's going to do it for this episode. If you want to learn more about the cars and the topics we talked about, you can click on the links in the show notes. And don't forget to send us those questions, comments, 30-second video clips to talkingcars@icloud.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next week.